Right, good morning, grade 11s. This is lesson 6 of the kidney and the formation of urine. Right, let's go. Carrying on from where we left off last lesson. And I do hope that anybody who had any problems understanding the work that we did last lesson emailed either me or Mrs. Florenza to ask for some help on this. Okay. So today we're starting off with what is called osmoregulation. Well, this is part of the formation of urine. So this refers to the fact that the body is able to regulate how much water is saved in the body when urine is formed and how much water passes out of the body in the urine. So it all depends on a whole lot of things like how much liquid did an individual drink in a day, or how much food did that individual get in their food in the day. So remember, if you eat something like a spun-speck melon, then there's lots of water in that. So while you're not directly drinking water, you're getting in water in that form. Okay. It's also linked to things like how hot the day is. So if the day is really hot and an individual sweats a lot, then a lot of water is lost in that way, and the body has to make sure that it conserves water. So that's what osmoregulation is about. It's all closely tied up with urine formation, and it's to do with how much water passes out in the urine and how much water is saved instead of being passed out in the urine. Okay, so in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, the final volume of water in the filtrate is controlled by a process that is controlled by a hormone released by the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland in the brain. You don't have to know it's the posterior lobe. Next year you will learn that. It's just the pituitary gland. So remember that the pituitary gland is a gland in the brain, and its function is to release certain hormones and produce and release other hormones. We'll deal with that next year. The particular hormone of interest at the moment is the hormone called antidiuretic hormone, and its abbreviation is capital A, capital D, capital H. Now, if you write it in a test or exam, the first time you write it, you write the whole word out, the whole name out, and in brackets you can write the abbreviation, and then after that, in that particular test or exam, now that the examiner knows that you know the words antidiuretic hormone, you can abbreviate it as ADH. So this whole process is controlled by a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. So let's see how this works. So when the filtrate in the tubule reaches the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, water is able to leave the tubule, so it passes from the filtrate and it passes out through special water channels in the membranes of the cells of the collecting duct in the distal convoluted tubule. Now, the regulation part of this whole thing is to do with the fact that these channels are able to open and close. And the opening of the channels is controlled by ADH, antidiuretic hormone. So if the body releases ADH from the pituitary gland, those channels open and water can pass out of the filtrate and back into the blood. And so by releasing or not releasing antidiuretic hormone, the body is able to control how much water is reabsorbed or passes out of the filtrate. The more ADH there is released, the wider open the channels. And if there's no ADH, the channels are closed. And so if there's ADH, the channels are open, more water is conserved in the body, and the urine that is passed out is more concentrated. In other words, there's less urine, it contains less water, and it is a darker color than at a time when there is no ADH released, and therefore the channels are closed and water is lost in the urine. Then the urine will be light in color and it will be dilute. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this particular drawing. I'm not going to look at the whole drawing, just going to look at a little part of it. Okay, so when I described the loop of Henle, so remember this is the descending and that's the ascending loop of limb of the loop of Henle. What I said to you is the most important thing that you have to know about the loop of Henle is that in the loop of Henle, some salts in the form of ions, such as sodium and chloride, so I'm looking at the drawing, I'm not looking at the text at the moment, those salts pass out of the loop of Henle, okay, and they go into the liquid of between the cells of the medulla. So there's connective tissue, but between the cells of that connective tissue in the medulla, there is interstitial fluid or tissue fluid. And these salts that pass out of the loop of Henle go into that fluid. What does that mean? It means that this fluid that surrounds all the tubule, especially the collecting duct and the distal convoluted tubule, is very, very salty. And the importance of that is that when the channels are open in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, because ADH has been secreted, when those channels are open, it is very easy for the water to move from the tubule through the open channels and into this liquid, because the water concentration in the liquid is so low because the salt concentration is so high. Okay, I'm going to say that again. So because in the loop of Henle, these salts are moved from the filtrate to the liquid, the interstitial liquid, or the tissue fluid between the cells here and here, the water potential of the liquid is very low. In other words, the water concentration is very low because it contains lots of salts. So very salty, very salty. Very little liquid, very little liquid. That means that when these channels are open, because ADH is secreted, the water readily flows from the filtrate through the open channels into this region of low water concentration. Okay, so if we look at the text here, it says, remember that in the loop of Henle, sodium and chloride ions left the tubule and passed into the tissue fluid of the medulla. This makes the salt concentration of the fluid in the medulla surrounding the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct very high, and therefore the water concentration of that self-same liquid is very low. So when those channels or pores in the membrane of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct are open, water readily moves down a water potential gradient or a water concentration gradient, I don't mind what you call it, into the fluid of the medulla, and then it immediately goes into the blood vessels. And that means that there's less water left in the filtrate than there would have been otherwise. And so water's been conserved in the body. Okay, So this conservation of water, or this regulation of the water concentration, is called osmoregulation. And what I said to you in a few slides back is if a person is hot and sweats a lot, then they lose a lot of water in their sweat. Then the body needs to conserve water. So let's talk about this. Okay. So there's a region in the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is able to monitor how much water there is in the blood passing through it. So it constantly detects, is there a low water concentration in the blood or is there a high water concentration in the blood? If there's too little water, in other words, the blood is too concentrated, then the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete antidiuretic hormone. Higher levels of ADH increase the permeability of the wall of the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So remember, I said to you that the ADH causes those channels in the wall to open. So water moves out of the ducts into the bloodstream. This results in the production of very small quantities of very concentrated urine. The result of reabsorbing water reduces the concentration of the blood. In other words, it makes the blood more dilute and it increases the volume of water in the blood. And this is what would happen if there's too little water consumed. All water has been lost in sweat if it is hot or following exercise, or a combination of those two. Okay, I'll go back and say this again just now, just to make sure that you understand it. On the other hand, if the hypothalamus detects that there's too much water in the blood, then it's important for the kidney to lose that excess water. So then the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland to stop releasing ADH. That means that the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct in the kidney become less permeable to water, so those channels close. And water reabsorption in those regions stops. And please note that in the rest of the kidney tubule, water reabsorption carries on going because there's no control over how much water is reabsorbed in the rest of it. This is the important place where the controlling happens. So what happens is water reabsorption in this region stops. And so large volumes of very dilute urine are formed. And this is the opposite of what happens when the blood is too concentrated. Okay. So now we're actually going into a really good season to take note of this. You monitor how many times you now go to the toilet every single day, how many times you go and urinate, and have a look at the urine you're excreting. What you will see is that you go to the toilet a lot, frequently. The volume of urine is high, and the urine is very dilute. So if you look at the color of the urine, it's very pale in color. And the reason why is because it's going into a cold season. Person's not sweating as much. And if a person isn't sweating as much, then the water in the body has to be released in a different way. And so it will pass out in urine. So the body constantly balances how much water goes out in sweat versus how much water goes out in urine. In summertime, because it's hot, then the body sweats. So some water is lost in the sweat. Therefore, there's less water to be gotten rid of in urine. So in summertime, you urinate less often, and the urine is concentrated and it's dark yellow in color. Wintertime, there's sweating, so the water has to be gotten rid of through urine, and so large volumes of dilute urine, and urine is pale in color. Okay. And because of that, the water content of the blood returns to normal. So let's have a look. If an individual takes in too much water, then the water content of the blood is high. The water concentration is high. That means that in the brain, and the pituitary gland is actually under the brain here, and the pituitary gland hangs off of the hypothalamus. So remember that the hypothalamus is monitoring how much water there is in the blood, and the hypothalamus senses that the water concentration of the blood is too high, and it stimulates the pituitary gland to release less ADH. And oh my word, look at my spelling of the word low. Okay, this is a Welsh spelling of the word low. Apologies, guys. So then there's a low volume of water reabsorbed by the kidney, and that means that the urine output is high. So there's a large volume of urine is excreted, and it is very dilute. And because of that, the water concentration of the blood returns to normal. Okay, so if there's too much water in the blood, the water concentration of the blood is high. That is sensed by the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland releases less ADH or no ADH. Low volume of water is reabsorbed by the kidney. Urine output is high, so it's a large volume of dilute urine, and therefore the water concentration or content of the blood returns to normal. If, however, there's too much salt in the blood, or the individual has been sweating, then what happens is the water content of the blood is low. That is sensed by the hypothalamus, and therefore the pituitary gland releases more ADH. So a high volume of water is reabsorbed by the kidney. Now I can spell high even if I can't spell low. And the urine output is low, so there's a low volume of very concentrated urine. Okay. And the water content of the blood returns to normal. Now I said that I would talk about this at some stage, and really this should be in blue because you don't have to know this. So please note this font is blue, you're just imagining it's white. Okay. Per minute, both kidneys, the volume of blood which passes through both kidneys per minute is 1,200 cubic centimeters. In other words, it is a liter and a little bit. So consider a liter of milk in your fridge. That's how much blood passes through the kidneys, both of them, in 1 minute. Of that, 120 cubic centimeters becomes filtrate. Of that filtrate, only 1 cubic centimeter of urine is formed per minute, which is quite a relief. Because imagine if there was that much urine per minute, you'd spend your life on the toilet. Okay, so now compare this figure and this figure. Look how much of that filtrate is reabsorbed. You know, I'm arithmetically exceptionally challenged. So let's presume we get this correct. 119 cubic centimeters of filtrate, or milliliters of filtrate, is reabsorbed, and only 1 milliliter cubic centimeter of that original filtrate per minute becomes urine. Okay. Right. So before we finish osmoregulation, and this is just for interest's sake, see, blue font. Okay. The length of the loop of Henle is related to the environment in which the animal lives. So the longer the loop of Henle, the more salts are passed out of the loop of Henle, the saltier the fluid between the cells becomes, and therefore the more water can be reabsorbed. I hope that makes sense. Do you want it again? Okay. The longer the loop of Henle, the more salt is passed out of the loop of Henle, the saltier the fluid between the cells becomes. Therefore, the greater the volume of water reabsorbed in the distal convoluted tubule in the collecting duct. So animals that live in a dry environment and don't take in enough water and have to conserve as much water as possible, very long loop of Henle, desert rat. Human, a beaver, lives in water in dams, and therefore it has more than enough water. So it has a relatively much shorter loop of Henle than a desert rat does. Okay. Complete the homework activity on page 252 of the textbook. Remember, email Mrs. Florenza or me if you've got any questions on this work.